Everyone for joining us. This is our continuing discussion on anti-Black and anti-Indigenous racism, a shared pathway series that began in September. These sessions are hosted by Black Anglicans of Canada. And in September, we started to share the table and the conversation with our Indigenous siblings. And I am delighted to welcome two very incredible guest speakers, Monica Forster and Aleshia Johnson, and you'll hear more about them later on as we go along. And I'm also equally delighted to share this task of moderating with my dear friend and sister, leighkern. My name is Reverend Jacqueline Daley, and I'm the co-chair of Black Anglicans with Lance Wilson, who is in the background working his magic. Today, we are going to spend a really exciting 1 hour sharing perspective of Black and First Nations women. And I am looking forward to hearing our incredible, you are going to love them. They're amazing, awesome women. And we're looking forward to continuing our conversation with them leading. Just as background, these sessions have been inspired by George Floyd's murder. Our goal was to amplify anti-Black racism within Canada and to put the spotlight on the lived experience of Black and Indigenous folks in Canada, because we have our own story. And the purpose of these roundtable is basically to amplify, shed light, and to bear witness to what the shape of our racism looks like on this side of the fence. So again, I'm delighted to welcome you all into this circle and look forward to hearing, receiving your questions as we enter deeper into our evening together. Welcome again.
And I'll begin with the territorial acknowledgement. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that the land I stand on is the territory of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat. Specifically, we acknowledge the title holders of this territory, members of the Anishinaabe Nation, the Michi-Saagiig, also known as the Mississaugas of the Credit River, the signatories of the Toronto Treaties. We acknowledge the contributions of all Indian residential school survivors, child apprehension survivors, Indigenous women, trans, two-spirit, and queer peoples who were displaced from their territories and came to Toronto over the generations, bringing their genius to shape our communities, found movements, and build spaces of cultural resilience. We acknowledge all who have been displaced by generations of international colonialism and theft of people, communities, families, children, and resources from the continent of Africa and around the globe. We acknowledge the brilliance and contributions of Black communities to Toronto. We acknowledge their courageous leadership. We acknowledge the presence of Black communities for hundreds of years on this territory and offer gratitude for all who labored to make Toronto safer for racialized people. We acknowledge the hundreds of years of Black and Indigenous solidarity, collaboration, love, mutual aid, and survival. We commit ourselves to confronting, challenging, and uprooting racism and colonialism at all levels of our personal, social, and collective spaces. We acknowledge all who came before us, all Black and Indigenous ancestors of the territories that you are on, and we give our gratitude and respect.
Thank you, Reverend leighkern. And I would like to share with you the declaration of Black Anglicans of Canada. It goes like this. We as people of African descent are commissioned and called to be ambassadors of reconciliation. We're called to create opportunities and space for courage building, for healing, for fellowship and empowerment. This special calling is both a reminder and a challenge to ourselves and to the whole church that we are no longer destined to just obey, suffer, and witness, but to disrupt, heal, and lead. And so as the co-chair of Black Anglicans, we have formulated our own vision and mission. And all of this can be read on our Facebook page and our upcoming website, which is almost ready to be released. We also have 4 goals that took us, I think, 2 years for a group of 30 to formulate. And again, these are also available on our social media. Membership, we have definitely membership is open to Black folks who worship, work, serve, study, or volunteer in the Anglican Church community in the past, present, or those who aspire to be part of the Anglican community or support the stated vision and mission. And we also are open to other to our allies and those who support our vision and mission, but who do not identify as Black. So we also have a leadership team that we engage with on a regular basis that sets a direction and do some of the heavy lifting in terms of this work. And so I'm going to pause here, and I forgot to introduce Reverend Leighkern, who is a minister and a pastor engaged in ministry in the Toronto Urban Native Ministry and a priest within the Diocese of Toronto, and just really delighted to have her as my co-conspirator tonight. Over to you, Madame.
Thank you so much, Reverend Daley. And if we can just go to the next slide, it's my delight now to introduce my colleagues and friends who are joining us tonight. Aleshia Johnson is an advocate and law student at Osgoode Hall Law School in Toronto. She is also an advisor to the World Council of Churches, ECHO's Commission on Youth, and of the International Reference Group for the Pilgrimage of Justice and Peace. Aleshia is of Caribbean, Bahamas, and First Nations descent. Her Indigenous heritage is with the Six Nations of the Grand River in Ohsweken, Ontario. She is from the Mohawk tribe in Turtle Clan. She has a fervent passion for learning about the law and the public interest, especially Indigenous and women's rights. And Monica Forrester is the Executive Director of Trans Pride Toronto. She is a mother to many, but especially to 2-year-old son, Elijah. Monica is an activist, a two-spirit knowledge keeper, a mover and shaker who stands up for her Black and Indigenous community with courage and love. She is also the founder of the Indigenous program for Maggie's Toronto Sex Worker Action Project. Since 1999, she has worked in various agencies to educate and make services accessible for trans folks, people living on the street, sex workers, and many others. She has helped countless agencies learn how to serve trans women and women of color better. She has fought for Alora Wells and many Black and Indigenous trans women whose lives were taken by violence. Monica Shovik Forrester is a leader in her advocacy from her advocacy work to her work as an executive director. Please join me in welcoming Monica and Aleshia tonight.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Yeah, so we're going to stop sharing, screen sharing, and then we're going to get into a conversation. So this evening we're taking kind of a different format than what we've done before. We have some questions prepared for our guest speakers, and through these questions you'll get a sense of their story. So I'm going to begin. I have the first question. So tell us a bit about yourself and your journey as a Black and First Nation woman in Canada. And I believe, Monica, you're going first.
Okay. Well, hi everyone. My name is Monica Forrester. I'm a two-spirited trans woman of color. I identify as queer. I'm a mother to my son and many other people in the community. So I kind of got that name over the years of working directly in community, advocating, and just supporting community members for the last, well, I've been in the LGBTQ2S and questioning community for over 30 years. but doing direct services for over 20. Um, so I am Black and Indigenous roots. I come from Curve Lake, Ontario. But I was born and raised in Toronto for most of my life. I was a child of the apprehension as a child, so I was in foster care for the first 10 years of my life in Belleville, Ontario. Um, so, kind of coming back into finding my own identity was hard, being assimilated by white people and not really recognizing my true heritage. Was internally it was hard. It was hard to engage with community, to understand community, and there was just so many challenges. Uh, so growing up in a mixed culture family, uh, as a biracial person, is people always think it's always, oh, you're biracial, it's a great thing. But I found I was never Indigenous enough and I was never Black enough to be a part of many things in the community. So internally, for many years, I left home at a very early age at 15, trying to find myself on the streets of Toronto downtown. And I found myself within the queer community, and I met a ton of two-spirited trans people within those communities. So they really kind of guided me to where I am today. I credit them for my survival. When we think of harm reduction today and all the work that's being done around harm reduction, actually harm reduction really existed before that name ever came about. And even so I was learning how to survive, I was learning how to stay safe, a lot of my peers in the late 80s and 90s died very prematurely because of the stigma and discrimination of who they were as Indigenous folks or Black African Caribbean people, due to being also two-spirited and trans. It came out in an era when HIV/AIDS was very prominent in the 80s. So it was a very trying time. And for the larger gay and lesbian community that had more access than the trans and two-spirited community, just due to the ideology of trans people at that time. And that's still very present today, how people look at trans and two-spirited people. So many trans people really died because of the lack of supports, compassion, validation of who they were. So that really pushed me to really support people in community, bring a voice to the community. I was actually probably doing advocacy before I even knew I was actually an advocate. So it was, so I knew people that were, trans people deal with a lot of stigma in the community, and most of them end up homeless. Lots of community, loss of family, and then on top of that, that layer of the system that's always criminalizing them, if it's the police or the justice system. So these are common threads that a lot of trans and two-spirit people face daily in their lives. So that's when I thought, I had to really look at my life and, what I needed to do to better the lives of people in my community. And 1999, the 519 gave me that opportunity to open the first ever trans two-spirited drop-in for homeless and sex working people. And I was the first ever outreach worker. So that was really uplifting for me, because trans people never had people come up to them and say, do you need harm reduction supplies? Do you need supports? They were validated who they were. So once I started working in that position I stayed at the 519 for almost 10 years exactly. It really lifted the community that they were someone. You know what I mean? That they had a space that they can call their own, and they can engage with what's going on in their lives and be supported and just have a safe space. We got to remember, at that time, trans women weren't going to women's spaces. They were still very discriminated against, right? So I also was part of the Trans 101 primer that we worked endlessly with the city to make accessibility for trans and two-spirited people in shelters and women's or men's spaces as whatever their self-identified gender was. So, you know, these were very important moments within the community around access. And I'm not saying access is, you know, as a person of color, I know access is not always the most safest place. It's not always safe going into places. You know, that's something as a trans two-spirited woman I've experienced from other cisgendered women, from other people that are occupying those spaces or people that are actually facilitating those spaces. Right, so so I'm consistently there trying to make change. So I felt like when I was working in different agencies, I didn't have, you know, it was great that I was doing a lot of the work, but a lot of agencies wanted me to stay silent. So I felt like I didn't have a voice, you know. So I felt like, you know, well, trans women and two-spirit people need more than just a drop-in and a place to eat. You know, they need someone that's going to listen to them and advocate for housing and employment and equal rights and, you know, and all these other things. And so that's when Trans Pride Toronto was, you know, was founded. You know, I think my boss at the time said to me, you know, you're only here to do this. You know what I mean? And that's when I said, wow. I said, you know, and I felt as my voice got louder, they felt like they were trying to silence me, you know. So it was okay that I was working in a space and it should have been privileged that I had a job and that I had these things, but I didn't have a voice to actually advocate for the community that I identified with or connected to. So that's when Trans Pride Toronto, a collective, a trans and two-spirit and Black Afro-Caribbean trans women got together and said, we need to found an agency that works directly within the community. And you know that saying where they say, not with us or with or there's that saying where, you know, we want to make the decisions of what happens around programming, around our lives. You know, it's okay. It's great that cisgender people want to support us, but it's our voices that need to be heard in that whole process. So, so we were satellite for many years because, you know, I had to survive. I had to work other jobs, and we didn't have any fun. It's so hard as a Black, Indigenous, trans woman to get funding. No one wants to fund you. You know, I feel that it's been really, I've had little grants and stuff like that, but I've really had struggles trying to get funding, some core funding that we could actually have a drop-in space, actually we can provide services. So that's something that I've been, you know, the last couple of months, I've really gotten a lot of support from community because after the Laura Wells murder and my other girlfriend, Julie, that was murdered in December, I felt we need to have this space. It's really important that we need to roll out these services and make sure that no one is lost within that process. Violence is very hard within the trans and two-spirit community consistently. It's most often not reported because we're most often not believed. You know, so a lot of trans people deal with violence, you know, and they're silenced, right? So so we actually got a space at the Holy Trinity. So we went to the Holy Trinity, and Zach, which is the director of programs there, was really supportive of supporting us through this. And Chanel Gallant, a well-known feminist activist, sex work activist, did a campaign, raised a bunch of money so we can actually get a space and we can get things for community. Unfortunately, due to COVID, kind of squashed everything. It's, you know what I mean? But we're still out there. We're still out there doing outreach, supporting people, doing online supports, doing Zoom one-on-one, doing referrals. And hopefully when COVID kind of eases off, we can get into the office space and start doing some culturally specific programming for Black and Indigenous folks and stuff like that. But right now in my life, I'm working at Maggie's Toronto Sex Work Action Project. I've been there for 13 years. You know, it's an agency that's very dear to me. I went there when I was a youth looking for help and support, and they were always had open doors. They were non-judgmental. They listened to me. I didn't have to explain what I did or who I was. So I'm so honored to work there and be a part of that agency. And so I run the Indigenous programming there, which I've been running for the last 13 years. We have weekly drumming and circles, and we have a peer outreach team that gets out there and makes sure that we engage and connect with community. But I also work at Street Health too. I'm all over the place. So I like to be all over the place because I really, the last 22 years, I've worked in about 15, 16 agencies just to bring visibility. I think it's around bringing visibility, dismissing these ideas that trans, two-spirited Black women can be just as, asset to many agencies and the work that they do. So I kind of was like the poster girl, putting up with all the slack and changing policies and being stigmatized. But, at the end of the day, I just put a smile on my face because I know, eventually people are going to say, hey, she's just like everyone else. And I wouldn't change a thing. I love it. I love going into spaces that I don't know and making really allowing people to check themselves and really recognize, wow, you know what I mean? I think we're so bombarded by what society thinks of different groups of women or trans people, or we see things on TV that really goes beyond what a trans person is until you actually meet them. And then when you meet them, like, oh, she's just like me. You know what I mean? And so, and I think, even as a person of color, those are some things, breaking barriers with people that were non-Black or non-Indigenous. I think people have these ideas of who we are, you know what I mean, until they meet us, and it's really great you're bringing a forum to all the injustices of Black and two-spirited people that's going on today with here in Canada, but also, in the world and United States, because our voices need to be heard, that we need to stop the violence that Black and Indigenous people are facing daily in their lives, and yeah, so I'll stop now because I know I can just ramble and I'd probably take the whole hour.
Thank you.
So I'll let Aleshia talk a bit and then we can go on to
rich and wonderful. I want to, just for our audience, can you say a little bit more about what two-spirit means? Can you say a little bit about that?
Okay, so I think excuse me. Well, I think it's an American term. It's a new term that I think it was created in the early 90s. Just a person that possesses both. But I think within the Indigenous community, we do possess both male and female spirits. But I think I think my own perception is just someone that's just another person within the larger community. Two-spirited people for centuries or hundreds of years have been very instrumental within communities around, they were knowledge keepers and they supported women and men within their communities, and through colonization erased all of that. And it's something that's been for a lot of Two-Spirit, really detrimental to who they are within their communities. And that's why we see such an influx of Two-Spirited people here in Toronto. It's because they have to leave their reserves because of this colonial idea that Two-Spirited people have been erased. So we are reclaiming. It's happening. We're seeing more accessibility and more knowledge, being taught to the younger generation, even the older generations. I talk to elders in the community that, oh yeah, I know about two-spirited people, but they hold on to the religious faith, which is fine. But I think it's kind of reclaiming our own culture within that whole context of religion. You know what I mean? And there's nothing wrong with to understanding who two-spirited people are and still be very much into, practicing religion, God, or whoever your God may be. So.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Monica.
Yeah, no problem.
Hear your story, and more will be coming forth from you. This is an evening for voices to be heard and for your voice to be heard. So I'm going to turn now to our second guest. Aleshia, tell us about yourself and your journey as a Black and First Nation woman. Over to you.
Hi, well, thank you so much for having me this evening. I feel like it's such an honor to have this space to share and to listen to everyone who's here. Thank you, Monica, for your story and for the work that you have poured into their community. I'm so inspired. I hope I can be half as good as advocate as you. I'm fairly new in my advocacy journey. I've just started law school. And I would say for the past decade, kind of coming into myself and who I am as a First Nations and Black woman. So as mentioned earlier, I'm First Nations from Ohsweken. I was raised in Hamilton, grew up in Hamilton most of my life, and Dundas. My mother was a single mother, and I never knew my biological father, who was or is from Bahamas. I've never met him, and it's actually just until recently that my family from my biological father's side have been reaching out to me, or at least one brother has, and kind of making himself more visible in my life, and that's been a nice connection to have, because I didn't grow up knowing my biological father's side. So I grew up with mostly Indigenous people, mostly Native folks from Ohsweken, and but my mother also she married, and she married a man from Barbados, and so I've been familiar with my Caribbean heritage most of my life through him. I don't think it's been until recently, I would say within the past 10 years, 10 years, that I've really started to understand how my identity, how my ethnic identity, how my identity as a cis female, and my identity as you know, a heterosexual woman has really like impacted me, and really is my lens through which I see the world, but also how the world impresses itself upon me. So I actually met Lee when we were both students at Yale Divinity School. And I would say that it was at that time in my life that I started to experience what I call the impacts of being Black and female and Indigenous. It's just, there's this unfortunate, I at the time of my life, felt like I was a magnet to violence, and that I didn't, there was nothing I could do to control that. So when I was a student at Yale, I was raped, and I had to leave the school because of that. And I lost my scholarship. I lost, you know, this amazing opportunity to further my education. And I had to leave, and I filed a complaint. And then 4 months later, I was raped again, and this time I was date raped. So I lost consciousness, and I actually woke up the next day, and there was, you know, the guy who I had been hanging out with next to me, and I was naked, and I went to the police. So I had two concurrent investigations going on, essentially, both of which were related to rape and sexual assault. And it was a very difficult time in my life, probably the darkest time in my life ever. I felt like I had lost everything and I had no reason to live anymore. And it was horrible because I was really like on such a good path. Like I felt like, you know, I had the whole world in front of me, and then all of a sudden was gone. And, you know, that's when I really started to think about, you know, violence against women, violence against trans women, violence against any, sort of marginalized group. Why is it so prevalent, and why, and what can we do to prevent it? And after, so we had the criminal trial. The student was suspended for 6 months. I had to do a lot of healing. The criminal trial was 2 years. He was acquitted, and after that verdict, I was just gutted. I didn't know what to do, and I don't even know really like how I got through it, other than to say God pulled me through the support of my friends, through the support of my community, which was really the Anglican community. I was given, friends took me in to live into their house for years, and when I needed a safe space. And, I've just been learning through the year, and sorry, when I was, after the conviction and after the Yale opportunity kind of fell through my fingers, I decided I wanted to go to law school. And I decided that I wanted to learn the law for myself, and I want to be able to interpret the law and be an expert on the law, so that I can support communities who've been hurt by violence. In particular, lower income, marginalized communities of any kind. Because we're all connected. We all have this common thread of being impacted by racism and colonialism. And I really feel like, it's interesting when you're both Black and Indigenous, how you're kind of part of two of these worlds that have been so harmed by the dominant society. And so I can appreciate the history of colonialism, and I understand how that has impacted my life, my family. I see intergenerational trauma at work. I see the effects of colonialism everywhere. It's just so obvious to me. And the same for being Black, I think that I'm Black presenting. I don't know, but a lot of people, when they look at me, they don't think that I'm Native. They think that I'm Black, or they think that I'm mixed with Black and white. That's usually what I get. But I share that same sentiment that Monica shared, which was, when you're part of both communities, you can often feel like you don't belong in either, because you're not Black enough or you're not Native enough. And that has been a struggle for me. But I think now, as a more mature person, I feel like I'm in a space where I'm bringing those two identities together as one, and I feel as though I'm fully both. I always have this mentality of I am not half Black or half Native. I'm fully Black and I'm fully Native, and they are one. And so that's something that I really feel in my heart when people ask, like, what's it like to be biracial? That's something I always share. But yeah, I'm really excited to be at law school. This is my first year. I just can't believe I was been able to have this opportunity to go back to school after 6 years. It's been really difficult not being in the classroom. I really love school, and I was so sad and hurt when I lost that opportunity, but God is good and He restores. And I'm just so grateful too that, Lee has been a part of that journey, and she's been able to see the whole kind of story unfold. And I'm so grateful to be here tonight to share that with you, and to share, the good news that God is at work, and God can heal, and He can bring you through anything. God is so good. So thank you for having me.
Just wonderful. And you have, Monica, Aleshia, you have just expanded us and expanded this space. And I am so grateful that this is a place that you feel comfortable to share your story. We are honored and expanded as a result of your voice and just your courage. You guys are waymakers. And that's a word that comes to mind, waymakers. And so really, really grateful. And so more to come. I'm so full already. My heart is full. But I am going to hand it over to my co-conspirator, Reverend Kern, to continue with the with this conversation that is so rich and so wonderful. Thank you very much for sharing your journey with us.
Thank you, Reverend Daley. And my next question is that this series began in the wake of the tragic murder that we saw of George Floyd. And as we know, on this territory, over 9 Indigenous people have been murdered by the police since just January of this year. And of course, Chantel Moore comes to mind, the young Indigenous woman who was killed by police on a wellness check at her home in Edmundston. So as we remember George Floyd, as we remember Regis Korchinski Paquette and Chantel Moore, does any name of one person that you have loved and lost come to mind for you and that you would like to invoke and remember now in this space?
For me, I think of my cousin Natasha, who tragically lost her life in November 2017. I'm wearing the memorial pin that we were given at her funeral. And Natasha was murdered by her former partner, who shot her in the face and left her children without a mother and they don't have a father. Their father was killed as well, actually by the police. So I think of them, I think of Natasha, and I think of her partner as well.
Thank you, Aleshia. Monica?
Samia.
Can you hear me? Oh, here we go. Hello? Okay, I would say Laura Wells, but I've have a ton of women that I grew up with that have died prematurely on the hands of either their partners or people that preyed on them. So like Laura Wells, she was a homeless trans woman of color, biracial, Native and Black. She was dealing with partner abuse from her boyfriend. And also just the system itself that didn't take the time to find out who she was. You know, she sat in a morgue for months, unidentified. They knew she was a trans woman of color. They knew she was in the area where trans people hung out. They did no kind of, awareness or got in touch with any agencies in the downtown east side to see if there was a trans woman missing. But this is a common thread. And when I think of my girlfriend, Cassandra Doe, that was murdered in a preventable murder, she was Vietnamese and white. You know, this guy that killed her was known to police, but the police did nothing to notify community that he was at large. So it took a life of my friend to actually not even make change, because that was even 10 years prior to that. I want to say a shout out to Shavana Abdi, a Somalian trans woman in Hamilton that died in police custody. She was dragged down the stairs by police and died due to that situation. These are common threads that a lot of trans and two-spirit face daily in their lives. I can talk about my own experience of rape and violence with police and people that prey on me, and nothing's been done. I've always, for many years, just kind of never said anything and felt that it was my fault for who I was, or because I was a sex worker, or because I did drugs, that I put myself in those situations. We are meant to believe that those things are our own faults. I did survival sex because I had to do it. It wasn't something I chose to do. I didn't wake up and say I was going to be a sex worker. You know what I mean? It was really hard, but it allowed me to transition into the person that I am today. It allowed me to go to college to get a degree in social work. It allowed me to live in a place that I can call my own. allowed me to transition to the person I am. So people don't understand those things and the struggles that a lot of racialized and marginalized people go through, in their lives, and we sacrifice things and sometimes take away some of our own dignity to survive in this world. You know what I mean? And when I hear of Aleshia's story, her experience around rape and not being believed, and these are commonalities within our communities. These are things that are consistently happening day and day in. I hear it all the time, and I still experience it. When I'm calling the police, someone's trying to hurt me, they're telling me, oh, he has mental health, that, what, and they're not charging him. What does that say about a woman of color and who I am and my safety? These are things that I constantly have to deal with. I get carded being in places, doing outreach. Why? Because I'm a woman of color and I'm trans. These are consistent things to kind of control our communities, to really, to erase our identities and erase who we are. And, when I really got loud, very loud with the Laura Wells, and, not only the police and certain agencies that just dismissed her for who she was, I was scared. I was scared to challenge police because I knew I might have had privilege in certain spaces, but I didn't have privilege when I stepped outside my door and I was a target, but I said I had enough. I've lived 50 years of my life and I'm tired of it. And, as much as I was scared and had anxiety and, but I think I had to do what was best for my community and for our people, our Black and our Indigenous communities, that we need voices. And I totally get that there's a lot of our women, trans and two-spirited people that don't want to speak out on this. And I understand it, I get it, you know what I mean? But I've made that my plight in life to make sure that, no person goes unnoticed in our communities, that we all deserve justice. So, but like I said, it's not over, as much as we can see change or they're trying to make more diversity within the system, but that's just tokenized. We know that's tokenization. We know that things never change, and people, Black or Indigenous people in very privileged places and agencies or in police forces, they're dictated on what they can say and and are silenced on other things. So, I'm glad to be a part of a movement. Like I spoke at Black Lives Matter. You know what I mean? I thought, and I'm coming from a person that, like I said, I was brought up with white people and I never really had a sense of connection, unfortunately, with either Black or Indigenous people growing up. I even I said, I need to find my heritage. I knew my heritage, but I always got tired of saying, oh, you're whitewashed or you're this or you're that. And so I started to I went to work at Black Cap. I felt this was a place that I'm going to find who I am and connect with community. But I did find who I am. I found that I don't come from a very cultural baggage, but I'm Canadian Black. And there is a culture of being Canadian and Black. You know what I mean? And that's something I had to find working in a Black agency, because you have people from the West Indies, from Jamaica, from Trinidad, from Africa that have cultural, ties to their community. And it took me to work there to realize that I have, like Aleshia said, that, I have my Indigenous and I have my Black, and it's a culture in its own. So, but going back to that, yeah, so there's so many people that I could talk about that have passed on in my life. I find it's ongoing. It's trans women of color are dying yearly, and if we look in the States, they're dying daily. So, so it's something that affects a lot of our community members when it comes to around our. I always thought I'd never live past 30, because that was the life expectancy for a lot of trans and two-spirited people in my community. 20, I wasn't bearing, but we were bearing friends that were 19 and 20 years old. You know what I mean? So to me, to live to 50, going to be 51, that's like a milestone. You know what I mean? But I do credit my community for keeping me well, keeping me resilient, and supporting me. So.
Well, Monica, with just to stay on that path, what does healing and liberation look like from your perspective? Because your journey of suffering and pain, you have used that to create a pathway for healing and to liberate others, which is a theme that I'm hearing from both of you. And I think that's just the experience, the journey of Black women.
Yeah. Well, I think my faith, like I grew up going to church, and later in life, I've learned my indigenous culture, so I practice both. God's always been the center of who I was growing up and still is. He's listened to me when I was down, listened to me when I was depressed. I've always used the Creator too, I feel has also been part of my process of healing, part of my process of staying strong. So and I challenged for many years the church and their ideas of trans and queer folks, and and the stuff that has happened for many decades, with a lot of like Black and Indigenous people, or specifically more Indigenous people with the church, it was his struggle. But I know that's not God. I know that's not God. These are people that did those things. Because I know the Creator and God don't. He made me who I am. You know what I mean? And God or the Creator don't make mistakes.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And that's all I have to remind myself, is that we are all here for a purpose and a reason. And my purpose is to bring visibility and education and inclusion for all people in our society. And and like I said, that's where I am around my healing. So, and my healing is being in community. I think, like, I was a manager for a couple of years, and it was like I was doing all this kind of like, manager stuff, and I was losing community. I was like, as much as I wanted to climb up that ladder, I want to be where community is, and that's where my heart is. That's where I belong. So, yeah. So.
Thank you very much, Monica. Very well said. And I'm going to ask Aleshia. We're pressed for time, and we have some questions are coming in, and we want to give Aleshia an opportunity to talk about healing and liberation. And it's no surprise that the declaration for Black Anglicans, and I think you've all kind of embodied it, is to disrupt, heal, and lead. And you've led the way. You've shown forth what our mission and purpose is, all of us. So over to you, Aleshia.
Yeah.
What does healing and liberation look like from your perspective? Thank you.
Good question. Certainly for healing, my journey has been really about community as well. I think my community comes from the church, has definitely come from the church. My healing has come from the support I've been given through members of the church, through my friends who've prayed for me when I was in my darkest moments. I just remember there would be some nights after I was raped where I would sleep during the day and stay up during the night because I didn't want to be around people. I retreated, I went into a cocoon, and I just wanted to be far away from the world so I could be safe. And what helped me was when people knew of my suffering and they would reach out to me, or they would come and visit me, or they would just call me and ask me how I was doing. I think community is so undervalued, but just so important when we when we forget about ourselves and we ask someone else how they're doing, or when we know somebody else is going through a hard time and we make an effort to talk to them and ask them how they're doing. So community, friendship, relationships, prayer. For me, like I did my undergrad at Tyndale University and studied philosophy. But after I left, I kind of fell away from going to church. And part of that was because of marginalization and the hierarchies that happen in the church and all the social stuff that can go on. And my awareness of that and not feeling like I belonged within the physical institutional building is what I mean. But, you know, I don't look at my faith as being dependent on me going to a building every Sunday. And now with COVID, none of us are going to church in the building. So it's really amazing to see how we can have community with one another digitally in the safety and comfort of our own home. And it really does just show that, you know, that's been a man-made imposition on our society to make us feel like in order to be in good with God, we got to go to a building. So I think me just like also in connecting with what Monica said, not looking at God as the one inflicting the pain on me. This is society. This is a broken world that we're living in. And by me keeping my connection and keeping an open heart to the goodness of God, believing that I could be healed, believing that, you know, things will get better. That's what kept me going. And also my connection with Indigenous Anglicans and, you know, incorporating my traditional practices with my Christian beliefs as well. I smudge. When I pray to the Lord, I love to smudge before I pray. It gets me in that mind space of entering into prayer. And that's really been for me a source of healing. And now I feel a huge movement in my heart of healing as I'm in law school and trying to understand the law, trying to understand why the system is so broken and why it is causing people pain, and wanting to get to the bottom of that so that I can help other people understand. And that is a source of healing, and that's a source of liberation. So, yeah.
Thank you, ladies. Just awesome. There is one question that is pressing because we're set for time, and I've been told to make sure, I don't know whether or not, Reverend Kern, if you've got that, we want you to provide advice to the bishops. We want you pretend that that you are their advisors. They've asked you, how can we decolonize the church? How can we make the church more whatever it is, how can we what is the way forward in the transformation that's needed in this? Because clearly the church has been a big part of your life, which is that's in itself a miracle. And so what recommendation would you give to our bishop to make the church more of what God intends it to be? I'm just assuming that you're feeling that it's not there yet. So over to you, Aleshia. Did you want to start?
Okay.
You're providing recommendation to.
I would say listen to the people. Don't stop trying to impose your own. We all come into this world with a lens, and everybody has a different lens because we're all different. And we need to give people space and opportunities, just like now, to tell them about their experiences, but not just to listen, but to actually find ways that you can begin to partner with those communities and give them space and make them feel included and make them feel loved and appreciated and not judged. You know, I think what I see, unfortunately, at the higher levels of certain churches is this. It goes in one ear and out the other. I don't know how much of it is actually internalized and how much they genuinely can empathize or care for these communities, you know? And I think it starts with acknowledging the failures of the past. Yes, we want to say the past is the past, but we also still need to like acknowledge it and honor the pain that people have been through. So the church needs to continue that dialogue and that relationship with marginalized communities, with Indigenous, with Black, with trans, with LGBT. Like we need to be in community with each other and actually listen to each other. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. And I'm going to go over to Monica. You are making recommendations to the bishops.
I think Aleshia kind of hit it on the head. But I think, you know, I think it's important to bring acknowledgement two-spirited and LGBT, Black, and Indigenous people within the congregation. I think it's important that because I think the church can really change and shape the way people look at people. You know, and I think I remember growing up and going to Sunday school, and I loved it. You know what I mean? I loved it. You know, and somewhere along the line, I hated church. I hated God for a little part of my life. I couldn't understand why he made me who I was. I couldn't understand the struggles I were in my life. But as much as I was still much a believer, I still had a lot of doubts. And I think it's really important that the churches really emphasize on the diversity within our communities. And really, you know, and I think a lot of people look up to the church on what is acceptable and what isn't. So I think it's up to you, and you hold a great bunch of that power in how to break down those ideas and to bring inclusion to the most racialized or marginalized people in our communities that miss going to church. You know, I haven't been to church. You know, it's pretty upsetting, but I haven't been to church in years. Actually, Jan, she works at the mission. She's a great friend of mine, and I love going to see her because she's a priest, but she doesn't put these expectations on people. You know, people could believe whatever they want to believe or how they grasp God. You know what I mean? And I just feel, you know, we should have more, like Aleshia said, I think reaching out to community and maybe having nights for just trans and two-spirited people or queer people of color and Indigenous heritages to be a part of a healing group, or just like, you know, a sermon of, you know, I would love to go to church again. You know what I mean? I always loved when, you know, I think of, like I went to a gospel church where they sing a lot, and I don't know, I just loved that. I felt a sense of community and connection, you know, and you know, and it took me a long time, like I said, and just with to really, like, I've always been a believer in God. I always loved God, but I've always practiced it in my home because of all this kind of hypocrisy within the churches around two-spirited and trans people and their ideologies of who we are and what we should be. And I just felt like I didn't want to be in a space where I felt that I was being questioned about who I am. And I think a lot of queer people and two-spirited and Indigenous, two-spirited and trans people maybe feel the same way. Because we got to remember a lot of community members have been kicked out of their communities because of who they are, and a lot of it is due to religious-based ideas of non-inclusion of these people that don't fit this heterosexual cis kind of ideas. So, you know, I think, you know, it's having diversity in priests that are doing services would be great. You know what I mean? I think, and doing call outs and supporting communities. I think getting out in communities and really supporting them and listening to them and what they need would really allow people to feel like they're feeling included. So yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank
No
you.
problem.
Lots of conversation. I'm going to hand it over to Lee, Reverend Kern, for some final thoughts. And thank you. We are so grateful for your voice and for your, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Over to you, Reverend Kern.
Thank you so much to both of you. Maybella just put in the chat, who's a member of the community, comes to the Nietzsche Circle, which Monica and I both go to. And she said that she just smoked her traditional ceremonial pipe and offered that smoke, offered those prayers for the healing of Black and Indigenous people all around the world. So Gichimigwech Maybella, a Ojibwe Two-Spirit Knowledge Keeper who, as we were talking, was holding our words and holding our hearts tonight in prayer, and smoking her pipe, offering that smoke up to the Creator. So thank you so much, Maybella, for doing that. And thank you so much to Monica and Aleshia, both for sharing your hearts and sharing your journey. Your resilience and courage is astounding, and we're so grateful. This series is called, Shared Pathways, and we were thinking as that title of, as people that were enslaved, were fleeing slavery, Indigenous peoples help them on the journey to stay hidden, to stay safe. And Reverend Jacqueline even shared with us last week that up near Oro Medonte, Indigenous communities took in whole Black families and hid them, keeping them safe from white supremacist violence. So that shared pathways is what we're talking about in this series, and you both really highlighted that and highlighted the path forward for community and connection and transformation. So thank you so much for your witness and your beautiful hearts. And the chat is just blowing up with gratitude. And thanks to everyone who tuned in. And Reverend Jacqueline, do you want to tell us about what's coming up next week?
Yeah, okay. Next week, folks, we are back. This is our final session. And so please don't stay away. Let me just see. Oh, Vernal, can you bring it back up, share again, so that we can, so folks can see it, almost the last slide. What are we going to be, what's our thing next week? Oh. We are going to be talking about building alliances, solidarity across Black and Indigenous communities. So we're going to continue. We have started this focusing on women's unique journey, Black and Indigenous women's journey. And so next week, we're going to talk about what that looks like at a community level. And Aleshia is going to be back. And Reverend Leighkern will be here with Sandra from Toronto Urban Native Ministry. And wow, look at that, Lance Wilson, my goodness, and myself. We're going to be talking about the shape of that, and particularly sharing our Black Anglicans of Canada journey with our Indigenous siblings. So please, please, please come on back. We have lots more expanding to do as we continue this incredible opportunity to disrupt, heal, and lead in Jesus' name. So thank you again for being with us. We are really grateful for your time.
Thank you for having me.